Welcome to our July webinar, Metrics That Matter Learning Series, which is our series for 2026. Today we'll be talking about preparedness and managing risk and what its role is in measuring organizational resilience to drive preparedness and innovation. I am your speaker today. I'm Linda Nelson, founder and president of ICOR. I manage the day-to-day operations of our education and credentialing programs, and I do serve as an expert member of the U.S. delegation for ISO Technical Committee 292 on business continuity, crisis management, and both organizational and community resilience. In fact, we had meetings in June in Germany to work on some of the standards, and next week we are starting to work on some standards on business continuity. Last month we finished up the new 2026 version of ISO 22316 on organizational resilience. That should be published later this year. ICOR also serves as a liaison organization to ISO Technical Committee 292, which allows us to have experts from around the world whose countries maybe don't participate or who would like to participate via the ICOR liaison relationship. And so this is really important to us to support the international standards around the work that we're doing with our education and credentialing programs. As I mentioned, this is our Metrics That Matter learning series. They're offered monthly and on demand. You can watch any of the ones that have passed from February through June on our YouTube channel, as well as via our website. And if you listen to all of them, you can earn your Measuring Resilience Learning Badge at the end of the year. So far this year, we did an introduction to ICOR's Organizational Resilience or Capability Assessment Metrics tool, and looking on the importance of measuring resilience and trying to move from theory to metrics that matter, the metrics that you can use to demonstrate where you are right now, and metrics to show how you're either growing or not growing. Our March webinar was moved to April, and we talked about the leadership and strategy metrics that are part of Dimension 1. The next week, we looked at Dimension 2 on culture and behavior metrics. And in May, we were very honored to have Bassem Obaid share with us best practices for Dimensions 1 and 2 based on his experience doing these capability assessments. And last month, we looked at infrastructure metrics. Today, as I mentioned, we're going to be looking at preparedness and managing risk metrics. And next month, we welcome Bassem Obaid back as he shares with us best practices for Dimensions 3 and 4 on infrastructure and preparedness and managing risk. Then I'll return in September for continual improvement and innovation metrics. Bassem will come back again to look at best practices specific to Dimension 5. And we will close up with in November with how to build an agile improvement process metrics system. The purpose of these webinars is to learn about how ICOR measures organizational resilience using our Organizational Resilience Capability Assessment tool. And what we're going to do is look at Dimension 4, which is Preparedness and Managing Risk. And after the review of each of the 3 strategies in Dimension 4, you're going to have the opportunity to answer questions about those capabilities and behaviors and see how you score. And if you haven't done this before, I really recommend that you give yourself, that you do the scoring as you go. And if you haven't had the opportunity to attend these in the past, go back and look at the other 3 dimensions so that you can get yourself some of these kind of snapshot scores to see how you're doing. And then you can compare the dimensions, because once we finish with Dimension 5, you should have a really good snapshot of how you're evaluating whatever organization you're evaluating, to be able to compare strengths and weaknesses, again, using that snapshot approach. We're not going through every single question. We're giving you an idea of what they look like. But we really want you to walk away with a broader understanding of organizational resilience and those capabilities and behaviors that provide that data and provide those metrics for measuring your current state. Where are you now? That will help you then plan for that future state. So our capability assessment is based on having these 5 dimensions: leadership and strategy, culture and behavior, infrastructure, preparedness and managing risk, as well as innovation and continuous improvement. Each dimension has 5 strategies that support it, and each strategy has 3 strategies support it. And each capability, let me just start that again. There's 5 dimensions. Each dimension has 3 strategies. That's how you get to the 15. And then each strategy has 5 capabilities. So that's how you get to the 75. And then we totally mess up the math with our behavior categories. So I've mentioned in the past that for 2027, we're going to be working on our behavior categories and trying to get those to be more consistent with the numbers of those. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. So when you're doing your scoring, we have 3 categories for scoring, or 3 levels. We have a 1-star, a 2-star, or a 3-star. And you'll notice you get 1 star if you see that your organization does what it's doing with that capability or that strategy to be 0 to 49% of the time, which means that you're doing this kind of on an ad hoc basis, that you're addressing performance issues, and that you're identifying and monitoring progress towards project performance objectives. And I will say that don't get frustrated if you're giving yourself a lot of 1s. That means you're starting, you're doing something. You want that to be not a 0% of the time. But this initial ad hoc score is where you're going to start. You can't expect to get a 3 when you're just getting going. And there might be things that you're doing in your organization that you've done for a long time that will give you those 3 stars, that optimized level. That's something that you're doing 90% or more of the time. But most likely, you're going to be getting scores in the 1 or 2 areas, which means when you get to level 2, you're starting to be much more quantitatively managing. So you're using better data, and you're starting to be much more capable at what you're doing. So both capable at that particular capability or behavior, but also more capable across a broader scope of the organization. So you're focusing on achieving both project and organizational performance objectives, and you're using data and metrics for your measurement. And level 3 is really where you're both stable and flexible and efficient, all 3 of those things. And so you're balancing that consistency and flexibility to drive innovation. So we've moved now from really that risk-based piece to driving innovation, while again, relying on data and metrics. And that's really the challenge that we're putting out with this series this year, is you need to start relying on data and metrics and not just on your regular project goals. You need to be delivering something that can be measured so that you can see where you're improving and where you're becoming more vulnerable. Because nothing is a single state. We move from one to the other really on a very regular basis, depending on change. So I want to talk a little bit about these behaviors. They score the same way, and we have these 6 sets. So we have adaptive and flexible, this idea that you've got the ability to change, evolve, and adapt in response to changing circumstances. Notice we're focusing on response and managing change. Like that's going to be one of our topics today. And you're doing that in a way that's both inclusive and collaborative. So to what extent does your organization and your teams work together towards a common purpose or a goal? And to what extent do you feel that shared ownership and joint vision? We also want you to be both aware and reflective, to be able to anticipate future conditions as well as learn from past experiences. We want you to be resourceful, creative, and innovative. So being able to find different ways to achieve objectives under those changing circumstances. Being able to be both diverse and integrated. So making sure that your organization is diverse, that you've got diversity in your people, and that you're integrating that working environment into that diversity. And then finally, what we want to be prepared, robust, and redundant. So we've got to make sure that we have plans of action in place in advance of their being needed, and that your strategies in those different plans are both robust and redundant. So you'll notice here that we have 38 scoring places for resourceful, creative, and innovative, and 57 for being inclusive and collaborative. So here is where we want to probably get, maybe we have 40 for each one of these, so that the scoring is more even across the behaviors. But for now, this is the way it is, and it's a big improvement over before. Our 2020 version of this assessment tool, you just scored on the basic definition that you see here. There weren't examples. So we'll be looking at those examples today of what those exact measurements, what those exact things that you should be measuring. Again, here's our resilience capability assessment with the 3 strategies per each dimension. And today we're going to be talking about having available resources, how you manage change, and how you manage risk. So dimension 4, and notice that for each one of these strategies and dimensions, we have these outcome statements. And these are kind of our facts that we build on, or the cornerstone that we build on for everything that comes behind it. So we know that organizational resilience is enhanced when the organization intentionally manages risk and when it prepares for the unexpected. And the alignment and collaboration of its systems that manage risk is fundamental to enhancing organizational resilience. And some people say risk-based systems. I like to say the managing of the systems that manage risk, or the alignment and collaboration. We talk a lot about getting rid of silos and getting people to work together. And that's why we really like the gears as the image that we like to use to support all of those things, that when we're all working together and collaborating, we're all in a stronger place, and the organization is going to be in a better place as well. So our first strategy is available resources. So the outcome statement for this is that the organization is developing and allocating resources such as its people, premises, processes, technology, finance, and information to address vulnerabilities, providing the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. So we're talking about preparedness and managing risk. So we're looking at what are those things that we're vulnerable to, and how do we just stay ahead of all the changes that are happening. So here is where I want you to start scoring your organization, or if you're a consultant or something like that, pick one of the organizations. So our capability number 47 is that resources are adequate and available when needed. This is a big deal, not just adequate, but they're available when needed. And this is something that you see a lot in failures when organizations have a crisis or a big emergency event, that yeah, we thought they were adequate and we thought we could get them, but we can't get them right now. And so we need, they're supposed to be there when you need them to ensure that the organization remains productive, and there's a minimization of risk to your operations. So you can give yourself a 1, 2, or a 3 for this. Remember, it's 0 to 49, 50 to 89, and 90% or more of the time. And you really can only measure this after you've had some kind of an incident, because it's a reaction. You can say we have adequate and available resources if you're not needing them. And so think about a time when you've actually needed to activate a plan or activate a strategy, and to see if what you thought you had available was actually working. And then for the capability 47, we have 2 behaviors. When you were looking at being inclusive and collaborative, the behavior outcome number 27 says that leadership ensures that employees are embraced and empowered to make meaningful contributions. Remember, your people are a resource. And so we need to make sure that those people are able to make meaningful contributions, because they are a resource to your organization, and you're going to need them, especially in response to a large change or an incident. And then we need to make sure we're also aware and reflective. So this means that the organization, and here the key word is routinely. I didn't want to put in annually. A lot of times standards and audits will say annually, or they'll have a specific period of time here. We intentionally use the word routinely. It's part of what you do. So if you're required to do something monthly, daily, whatever that time frame is, whatever, that's your routine piece of this. But they need to be able to review the suitability, availability, and the allocation of resources, taking into account the impact of any changes in the organization and its context. This is actually a requirement for most management system standards. So if your organization is tied to a standard where you get certified to it, or if you're just aligning and reviewing it, or using it, this should look familiar to you. So we're tying to two things: that you're reviewing it routinely, and you're looking at it whenever you see any changes to the organization and its context. And that context would be your internal or external. So any changes to your clients, your suppliers, whatever it is, your product or service that you're selling, all those become the context of that change. So make sure that you've given yourself a score of a 1, 2, or 3 for each one of these. So there's 3 total. The maximum you could get here would be 9 points. The next capability says that the organization uses diversification, replication, and redundancy to avoid single points of failure and to respond to incidents and change. So to what extent does your organization do that? When we're looking at the behavior of being both diverse and integrated, here is an example that says that the organization selects and develops employees with a diverse set of skills, knowledge, and behaviors that can contribute to the organization's ability to respond and adapt to change. And here is where you're seeing more and more organizations not just looking at your qualifications of expertise, but how you work with others, and giving you some of those other tests to look at really, I'll just keep it simple and say how you work, not the what you work. They're expecting you to have the expertise to do the work, but how do you get that work done? And so that the behavior that you're sharing is one that's very conducive to working with others and being able to work during times of change. I have so many examples to give of this, but I can't do that in this webinar, as we're just dealing with the tools to do the measurement or the metrics themselves. When we're looking at the behavior of being prepared, robust, and redundant, that the organization is making appropriate decisions on resourcing and capacity by using diversification, replication, and redundancy. Again, we're kind of repeating capability 48, but with the purpose that the core services are maintained at an acceptable and predetermined level. You'll see that you're seeing some business continuity language in here. What is an acceptable level of service? What is an acceptable, and that it's predetermined. That's something that you've decided ahead of time, not just at the moment. Even though we know that sometimes what you've planned ahead of time has to be modified, we need to have both of those in place. So again, you have a total of 9 points that you can earn here. The last capability under available resources that we're going to talk about today is number 49, that the organization has a process to staff new projects based on the project's requirements, and that the teams can be flexibly redistributed to new projects when needed. So looking at how your organization manages projects, are you using agile project management for some or all of what you do? And how do you manage your people and your teams based on these new projects, and where other projects maybe go away. So here, when we're looking at what does this look like to be adaptive and flexible? Well, the organization strives to develop an ability to identify and respond to change in a flexible manner. That's something that's an outcome. they're actively trying to do this. They might not be great at it, but they're thinking about it, and they're thinking about how they can get better at it, including modifying and redeploying capabilities, your arrangements, your structures, your activities, as well as your behaviors to manage those new conditions. It's just checking the questions. I will check the questions when we do our survey in a minute, or our poll. So this idea that when you see changes, are you able to adjust those projects and things? And I'll say, one of my friends works for a food company where they have a lot of gums, and they're unable to get the gums that they need because of the blockage of the canals in the Middle East. And so they can't have tons of different suppliers because what they need is only available in certain parts of the world. So they are down about 20% of what they need. So they actually have to reformulate how they cook it. I'm just using the word cook, make it or produce it or manufacture this product that they use in a lot of their food because of that. So here, what do you have to do to adjust to these new conditions? Because waiting doesn't seem like it's going to be a good answer right now. And then when we're looking at being resourceful and creative and innovative, that those resources are focused on initiatives with the best potential to increase the organization's value, as well as support the organization's values. So now you're going to get a chance to do a poll where you can see how your scores compare to someone else's. So we're going to be looking at capability 48 plus 2 of their behaviors. So give me a second to launch the poll. And we're only going to give you about 10 seconds. So you're going to have to be quick about it. So, and notice also, I have word limits, number of letter limits. So sometimes I've had to abbreviate. You might not get the whole question. But the organization uses diversification, replication, and redundancy to avoid single points of failure and to respond to incidents and change. And here is where I would expect this whole webinar today, I would expect this audience to be very prepared to answer some of these questions, because some of this is what you're responsible for doing. So I'm going to go ahead and share the results. And it looks like we have 15% of you doing this 90% or more of the time, with 20% of you, kind of the 0 to 49. And that's pretty much what we often see, is that the 1 and the 3 are balanced, where the remainder of you end up in the number 2, with the 50 to 89% of the time. All right, next we're going to focus on managing change. And here is where we're looking at that the organization has implemented systems to anticipate, plan, and respond to change or changing circumstances. And an agile change management process can help you implement methods for engaging and including all personnel into every stage of all those different change processes. And Mike, I've said this many times, but this is just the way it is now. And change is no longer a project. It's a process that every day we have to look at what the changes have happened and how that impacts what we're doing. So the first capability under managing change that we're going to talk about today is that the organization demonstrates that it is aware of circumstances that are likely to influence change and demonstrates the ability to anticipate and manage change. There's really 2 things you're looking at here. Are they aware, and are they able to then do something about it? So under the behavior of being adaptable and flexible, this idea that the organization is accepting of uncertainty and change, and this is kind of an interesting concept of accepting that, just understanding that this is the way the world is, and we're going to operate under these conditions. We're not just going to wait for the change to go away and get back to the way it was. And this is really part of the culture of your organization. That to what extent does your organization have a bias to action, where it values speed, not risk minimization, over perfection. There's a picture that I like to use from Adobe Images where there's this guy out there and he's got this big magnifying glass and he's looking at a beautiful lawn and he's out there with the scissors snipping to make sure that each of the blades of grass are the same height. But this idea that the most often thing that you hear when you're conducting any sort of a scenario or or an exercise or whatever words that you use for that is, well, we can't do anything because we don't have enough information yet. So looking at, they're really looking at, we don't want to take any risk here because it might be the wrong decision. So this idea that the organization has a bias to action, that they're not going to go off without any information, but you have to make decisions. And so this is why having a diverse workforce with diverse experiences really helps in making decisions that need to be made very quickly. Under the second behavior category, aware and reflective, that the organization just is kind of a repeat of the capability, but remains aware of situations that are likely to influence change. So again, that forecasting idea, where we're seeing this as, some people use the word issue, that there might be an issue out there. We're going to look at it and see if it actually becomes something that we need to manage. But paying attention to what's happening around you in your external context so that you're ready if it does start to impact you, or you can do some preparations so that it doesn't have as big of an impact on you. And then the final one under prepared, robust, and redundant is that the organization has the ability to absorb and adapt to the impacts of both sudden and unexpected incidents. This is something I'm not real thrilled with, the sudden and unexpected, because if you're being situationally aware, there shouldn't be something unexpected, but there are things that just happen and you're like, what? I never would have thought of that happening. And that happened. I mean, it's just the way it is. And so, go ahead and give yourself a score on that. So in this case, we have 4 questions, each ranging from 1 to 3 points. So you can get a total of 12 points for this capability. For the next capability, now we're looking to the people. So the organization actually spends time developing its leaders and its people who can adapt to changing circumstances, trying to help them to think beyond the current activities, the current strategy, and the current organizational boundaries. This is where a lot of times you'll hear like, oh, we had a management retreat or we had a management workshop, and we were really thinking about, outside the box, whatever words you want to use that are probably, a little bit funny that you think about, oh, somebody's using that term again. But just looking at helping people to manage change. And I always give this example of my father, who whole life was about, don't ask me to do anything if it requires me to change what I do and who I am. But he lived in an era that there was change happening. And I have to say that because he had that attitude of just not wanting to change and really ignoring the changes around him, it did impact his career. And it did impact his ability to really enjoy life because he was so afraid of change. And so we all know people like that, maybe some of us are like that, but helping people to learn how to adjust to change and deal with that is I think is not just a wellness issue, but it certainly can be a wellness issue if it gets extreme, but also helps your people to do better. We all want to hang on to what we know, and we get scared when there's something coming up that we don't know. But we do need to start thinking about all these things that could happen. And like I said, the people that manage risk for a living are used to thinking like that, and that's why you've picked that as a career. But many, many people don't pick that as a career because they don't want to think about it. But guess what? Everybody in your organization is important, and we need everybody in the organization to be able to manage change. And so we need to be adaptable and flexible. So making sure that we've got something in place to help us with that just-in-time decision making, that you've got decision point analyses as part of your program and project management activities. that you're underaware and reflective, that you've got common metrics that are being used to assess the impact and opportunity potential of these different shocks or stressors or trends, which allows you to effectively prioritize and conceptualize what's happening. Again, these metrics become really, really important to help you get a handle on what you might expect. And then this one, underprepared, robust, and redundant, you might really shake your head at this, but that I'm sorry, this is a different, that's in the next one. But anyways, the organization's able to avoid risks and capitalize on opportunities. And you can't do that unless you're looking at change. So you'll see these under this dimension, while we have strategy number 1 looking at managing resources, and then strategy 2 looking at managing change, and strategy 3 is going to be managing risk. They do overlap in a lot because they're all about being prepared. So managing change under Capability 55 says that the organization is able to adapt itself when needed without significant impact to the delivery of its products or services. So that your organization is able to get done what it needs to get done by adapting what needs to be adapted. And so looking at your organizational resilience strategy and your program of initiatives, and looking at them, that they're not fixed, but they're goals that you have, but they're fluid to ensure that they can be agile and they can evolve as your needs change and able to accelerate when you need them as well. When you're being aware and reflective that you've got data that's presented in ways that make those shock stressors and that trend data easy to understand, and using visualization and including things like exposure mapping and changes in your risks and your opportunities and your vulnerabilities over time. So making sure, again, you're using data to help you be more aware and reflective of what's going on, and that you're able to apply those existing resources to new purposes. Here's where we're going, kind of tying back to the first strategy under having that you're managing your resources, that you've got mechanisms in place to continuously evolve, and that you can modify your activities rather than seeking solutions. And maybe the word status quo doesn't always translate right, but just doing what you've always done, looking at how can we still get done what we need to get done for our products and services, even though our resources, we might have to change how we use those, and that we might have to modify how we get it done as well. And here's the one that I was going to say that some people get jumpy about, is that the organization identifies its risk takers and encourages them to rise to new challenges. And so we need people on our organization. We need them diverse. We need our risk-averse people, but we also need our risk takers. And we need to make sure that both of those voices are heard, because we're not going to be able to take advantage of opportunities. We're not going to be able to make quick decisions. We're not going to be able to apply new resources to new purposes if we don't take some risk. And so we need both of those types of people as part of our organization. So I didn't mention this in the last slide, but here we have actually 5 things to measure, so you can get a total of 15 points here. And this is where the point piece, some of them we said were 9, others of them, this one has 15. You're going to actually see some of them have even more. And so this is where I want to work when we publish again in 2027 to make the behavior categories have the same number, so that when we look at them, each one of the strategies has the same number of metrics that we're measuring against. And that also makes it more mathematically friendly. But anyways, it's just something that I want to look at again as we bring together our experts to look at our different behaviors. So let's go to our next poll, which is going to be looking at managing change. So your organization selects and develops employees with a diverse set of skills, knowledge, and behaviors that contribute to its ability, and here we go, to respond to change and to do that. Like I said, I can't get every, they only give you a certain number of characters to use for that. So we'll give you about 5 more seconds. All right. I'm going to go ahead and share the results. And interestingly enough, we had more people that only gave the 1 star here. We had the same amount of people within 2% that gave the number 2, but more of you picked the 0 to 49% of the time. To me, this is an easy HR piece, and I'm saying easy versus it's something that, when done intentionally, becomes hugely valuable to your organization. And so having that diversity in your workforce with people, and to intentionally looking for people who are diverse from each other, is important. I was talking to one of my daughters, and she was expressing frustration that she was trying to bring on a new team member and they just couldn't find the right team member. I'm like, well, what's the issue? And she's like, well, I'm trying to find somebody different from the other members of the team. We need to have a diverse team. We can't all have the exact same behaviors and knowledge. And she was, the skills were similar because they were on the same team trying to do the same project, but she was just saying, I need someone different and who thinks differently than I do and the other team members, so that we can be more productive in what we do. So I thought that was really interesting. Okay, here's our outcome statement, that the organization implements systems to ensure that, and you know what I did? I went ahead and I skipped them again. I did this last month too, but I don't think so. I did. So when we get done, I'm going to finish the polls that we missed. What I keep forgetting is that there should be 3 polls, and I've only been asking the polls that have to do with the capability versus the behavior. So I will go back and do the ones that I missed. So my apologies. The organization implements systems to ensure that risk is effectively managed throughout the organization. So capability 58, and here you'll notice we have 6 behavior categories. But capability 58 says that the organization has the capability to ensure that its critical activities will continue to operate at predetermined levels and predetermined capacity during a disruptive incident. So here we're getting to the managing risk piece. And you'll notice that this is very business continuity focused for this one. So when you're looking at being adaptable and flexible, that those responsible for collecting risk and impact data do so in an interactive manner, ensuring that the data is current, credible, consistent, complete, and correct. And this is why your data, you need to have data, and it needs to be something that you can depend on. And you can't do that unless it's current, credible, consistent, complete, and correct. That your strategies and solutions selected are inclusive and they meet the needs of all your interested parties, and that you've identified what those should be using collaborative means. That it needs to be both diverse and integrated. So you're collecting this from all those relevant interested parties, both vertically and horizontally through the organization, as well as externally as those are needed. Being aware that everyone in the organization is aware of your BCMS and their role in ensuring that it's effectively implemented. That your business continuity strategy supports the needed resource requirements to meet the organization's objectives, and that all of your plan documents are specific regarding immediate steps, that they're flexible to respond to changing circumstances, because like whatever you plan for is not whatever usually happens, and that they're effective in minimizing impact. So here you can see we've got 7 things to measure. So you'd have a total of 21 points for capability 58. For capability 59, now we're moving on to our technology, that your organization's information technology and security systems and its critical environments or its data centers are able to operate under all conditions. So we need our technology systems and our data centers to be built efficiently and effectively so they can add, remove, and change services at the speed of business, and using predictive analytics. And by the way, if this sounds complicated to you, it's how people who work in the data center and IT world work, is using predictive analytics in order to trend the use of capacity. So you heard about capacity planning, as well as performance in order to anticipate future needs. So this is a big part of what our people in technology do, that there's a very clearly understood total cost of ownership as you collect that data from all those relevant interested parties. Again, that it's inclusive and collaborative. That your technology systems are integrated using whatever IT framework you choose to use or that works for you. But you need to have that framework in order to address complex issues and to eliminate potential technology silos that you see between information technology, information security, cybersecurity, disaster recovery, and the business. And you could go on all the different silos that might exist in those technology systems. That we're aware of our building management systems and how they can be used to control mechanical infrastructure and to provide that real-time monitoring of equipment, so you don't have equipment that breaks and you weren't even aware that there was a problem with it. And then behavior outcome 35 under resourceful, creative, and innovative is that the technology systems are focused on continuity versus recovery. So some of you that might be in disaster recovery will be like, wait a minute. But the idea here is that we're focusing on continuity first, and what you can't keep operating, then you focus on the recovery. We know we have to have recovery strategies for everything, but that we would rather continue operating at some level than have to recover. And again, making sure that those strategies that you've implemented to do that are aligned with your business requirements. And then making sure that all your procedures are documented and that you've got maintenance procedures in place to minimize that unscheduled downtime. We have to have scheduled downtime to upgrade our systems and to update our systems, but this idea that unscheduled downtime is unacceptable, and that we need to make sure that all of our critical components are designed to fail safely as well. And so here we have our 7 requirements for this capability. And so here again, you would get 21 points at the maximum for having those IT systems in place. Our last one is capability 60, and that the organization ensures that strategies exist to manage your supply chain risk, your supply chain continuity, and your supply chain security. Big topic, as I mentioned. Supply chains are a mess right now. And so we need to make sure that your supplier contracts are developed to be as flexible as possible, and that your supply chain strategy is responsive to a volatile marketplace, where oftentimes the strategy is demand-driven. And so we need to just make sure that you've got flexible contracts that allow you to manage during times that are very uncertain. And that your KPIs that you have in place for building a more agile supply chain is aligned to the organization's top-level business strategies, and of course related to your industry sector and your product categories. Now, if you're in the supply chain world, all of this is something that you probably do every day. And then where you can, intentionally diversify your supply chain to reduce your vulnerabilities. I just gave you an example of where they really couldn't diversify with this gums piece, and that's just the way it is. But not everything is like that. There are things that are, but as much as you can do to diversify your supply chain. Just being aware of your supply chain network. If you've been to any of ICOR's webinars in the past where we're talking about supply chain, it's something crazy like 90% of companies, especially manufacturing companies, are unaware of their complete supply chain network, which means that they're then unaware of their supply chain risk. They might think they're aware, but they're not. They're not as aware as they should be. And then you should be using technology for your supply chain strategy in order to evaluate your supplier as well as your customer performance to help you improve both financially, your financial and operational capacity to respond and recover. And finally, that your supply chain strategy is redundant with multiple relationships with a range of suppliers whenever you can to have multi-source, dual sourcing, and or flexible product designs. Like I said, they had to reformulate whenever possible. And actually, I was going to say, because of the pandemic, this organization had experienced a similar shortage when things weren't able to come from the country that they needed it. And so they were in a better place because they did have those reformulations in place so that they were better prepared for that supply chain interruption again. So this capability has, again, the 21 points that are possible. So here is where I'm going to go back and just do all of the polls. So we're going to pause here. And I apologize for not doing 3 for each one. I didn't. So we're going to launch the poll that has to do with making decisions about resourcing and capacity. And actually think about it this way. I'm taking something and making it into an opportunity. This gives us a way to review everything we've just talked about by doing these polls. So just making sure that your resources that they support being able to making sure that your core services are maintained at an acceptable and those predetermined levels. I'm going to give you about 2 more seconds. All right. Here we have a nice low score for the number ones and a very nice score for getting 2 points. So good job with that. Let me go to the next one. And now we're talking about managing change, that the organization is able to adapt itself when needed without significant impact to the delivery of its product or services. So your business continuity people should be all over this because this is what you're supposed to be doing. Whether it's, and I would just challenge each of you that it isn't just response to an incident. You need to be looking at all of the changes, and managing change is now part of every management system standard. So if you're aligned to a standard, you need to be able to look at what those changes are. So I'm going to go ahead and share the results. This is like ideal because we have 1s and 3s exactly the same percentage, which is what we often see in real life when we do these, when we collect this data from organizations. But this is a nice high score here. And my guess is that this is because this audience is very engaged with this topic as well. You might get a different score from people who aren't as aware as you are. So next we're going to look at data, and that data is presented to make it easy to understand using high levels of visualization such as risk mapping and being able to see those changes in your risk and your exposures and your vulnerabilities, maybe I should say. All right, we'll give you about 3 or 4 more seconds. So here I like to see, I'm sorry, I have it backwards, that it doesn't look like as many people are using data as we should. So I hope that this series is really helping you to understand how we should be using data and how we should be sharing it with others, so that we can move some of those people up to 2s and 3s, because we really need to be using data to tell our story as well. Number 6 is that the organization is able to modify its activities rather than seeking solutions based on the status quo or what we always do. And you're being able to take existing resources and use them in new ways is kind of the rest of that of that capability. Give you about 2 more seconds. All right. Again, we're seeing the 1 and 3s pretty much balanced, but a decent score of 69% with the number 2s. All right, here we're getting to the supply chain questions. That the organization ensures that strategies exist to manage supply chain risk, supply chain continuity, and supply chain security. And generally speaking, by the way, when you're doing this assessment, you might get a higher score on the capability and the lower score on the behaviors because the behaviors are more specific than the capabilities are. So the behaviors really help to give you, what we say the capabilities are the what, and the behaviors are the how we do it. And I'm guessing that the reason that there's 24% only giving a 1 is because you all are very aware of perhaps breaks in your own supply chain that show you that you don't have an adequate strategies in place. But it still is nice to see 65% of you, more than half, are getting getting 2 points for that. All right, 2 left. This is specific to looking at supplier contracts and how flexible they are, and that your strategy is responsive to a volatile marketplace that is going to be more demand driven. All right. So this is really interesting. This is the first time that on all of the polls that we've done today that 1 point has outweighed everybody else. And so we really lost those 20 percentage points for getting a score of 2 for 50 to 89% of the time to 0 and 49. And again, my guess is that your vulnerabilities are showing in your organization based on the current state of what's happening in the world. And then our last poll, just being aware of all aspects of your supply chain network and what your sources of supply chain risk might be. And here is where, being aware is one thing, being able to have plans in place or something else. So being aware, you might think you'd score higher on this than you would for, totally understanding your whole supply chain, the vulnerabilities for some of those. All right, give you a couple more seconds. All right. So here you can see that we have a large score here for 90% or more of the time. And maybe you're just more aware right now just because of the state of the world, but it's also interesting that, being aware is one thing, being able to do something about it is something else. So thank you for doing this review of the webinar as we did our polls today versus doing all of them as we went. And thank you for your patience. So how many points did you score? There's 129 total points or total stars available. Go ahead and put it either in the chat or the questions piece so I can just take a look at it afterwards. I'm just curious to see how you did overall on Dimension 4, Preparedness and Managing Risk. If you do have questions, I'm probably going to take them later. So again, put any questions that you might have in the questions box. My technology not sharing, did slow us down a little bit for that. Just a reminder that we do have a whole series of courses and certification to become a leader in resilience and to learn more about each one of these things. And we have it for the manager level, the professional level, and the executive. And though it's really intended for those people who are managing risk, as well as who are trying to increase the resilience of the organization. Like I said, all these the past webinars are available on our website as well as our YouTube channel. And next month we have the opportunity to hear Bassem Obaid as he talks about what do dimensions 3 and 4 look like in reality when you're doing these assessments, and what are some of the findings that he has found in conducting these assessments for several years. Thank you for listening and participating. It looks like the phones are working again, so you can actually call and you can contact us to learn more. Thank you very much for coming today, and we hope you'll join us again next month.